Hey everyone, and welcome back to Rank and File Sports. And today we're going to be hopping right back into our series where we are predicting every single Power 4 team's record by the start of the college football season. Today with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska is entering their second year under Matt Rhule, and they are bringing in a highly touted freshman quarterback, Dylan Raiola. The offense is expected to improve quite a bit this season, and just the overall roster has also gotten better, which leaves a lot of people wondering if this can finally be the year where Nebraska breaks back into the top 25. The start to the season certainly favors them doing exactly that. Out of their first four home games against UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, and Illinois, Colorado is really the only team that's going to give Nebraska a close game. Colorado is going to be a little bit better than they were last season. Shedeur Sanders is a pretty good quarterback, and Travis Hunter is an excellent football player at both wide receiver and cornerback. But just overall, I think Nebraska's a little bit better on both lines, and they should be able to control the line of scrimmage, which will give them a slight edge, especially at home early in the season. The road trip to Purdue might be a little bit tricky, but Nebraska is a better team than the Boilermakers, so this one should be a slightly in Nebraska's favor, even though they are on the road. And then finally, right before the bye week, they play Rutgers at home. Rutgers is another team that is improving, but we do expect Nebraska, with the home field advantage, to keep this game pretty close and hopefully for them eventually pull out the victory. After the bye week, one more pretty easy game on the road at Indiana. This Indiana team might be a little bit better than some people are expecting, but they still have a ways to go, and we do think that Nebraska is also going to have an advantage in this game. Finally, the schedule gets a bit tougher on October 26, where the Huskers have to go into the Horseshoe and play Ohio State. There's a very good chance that they are actually undefeated going into this game, or even with just one loss. However, pretty much any way you put it, there's just no way that they're going to come out of the shoe with a win. So no matter what, we think Nebraska's probably going to pick up their first loss or second loss of the season against Ohio State. But the game against UCLA the next week is at home. It's possible that they drop off a little bit if they can't carry some momentum from maybe keeping it close with Ohio State for a while. So this UCLA game is going to be pretty telling for the rest of the season. If they can bounce back right away with a win at home, this could very well be a 9-win season for the Huskers. Following the bye week, the last three games are all decently difficult for Nebraska. Two road trips in there, the first being a pretty long one to USC. The Trojans are going to be a good team this year. It seemed like the team rallied around Miller Moss in the bowl game against Louisville better than they had been all season again, or with Caleb Williams at quarterback. But we'll have to see whether or not Miller Moss is as good of a quarterback as Caleb Williams was. The Trojans should still be a good team, but they will be struggling on the defensive side of the ball once again. So this one could end up being a shootout, and it's going to end up being a pretty close game. USC has the home field advantage, so it'll be tough to predict as of right now. This one really could go either way. Wisconsin at home is also going to be a pretty tough game. The Badgers are also going to be pretty good this season. They should be finishing near the top of the Big Ten Conference. This game is going to be probably a tiebreaker between these two teams in the standings. So definitely want to watch this one late in the year. And then finally, a road trip to Iowa to end the season. The Hawkeyes always have a really, really strong defense. So this is going to be a low-scoring game. If you remember the one last year, that one came down to the very last minute. Super fun game to watch. Overall, they've got 7 home games and 5 away games, with only 3 of their opponents ranked in the rank and file top 25, giving them a schedule difficulty of 5.5 out of 10.
Looking at the guaranteed wins for Nebraska, we have UTEP and Northern Iowa. You can probably imagine why this is a Nebraska team that we consider to be a blue blood, although they have fallen off a cliff in regards to that status in recent years. But with that said, they have a new 5-star quarterback from Georgia named Dylan Raiola. He's expected to be a star right away, so we expect Nebraska to have no problem early in their non-conference battles against UTEP and UNI. As for the likely wins, we have Illinois and Indiana. Nebraska has been on par with these two teams the last several years. They've been about the same, if not worse, than both of these programs. But we expect that to change this year. It feels like, the media is saying that every year, Nebraska is going to be better, Nebraska is going to be better. But we actually think this year is finally the year where they have one of their better seasons within the past 5 to 7 years. And we think that part of that criteria is that they are much better than Illinois, Indiana. So we don't think the Huskers will have too much of an issue with the Fighting Illini or the Hoosiers. Looking at the toss-ups, we have Colorado, Purdue, Rutgers, UCLA, and Iowa. We actually have Nebraska winning all of these games. We think Colorado and Nebraska, they have a little bit of a rivalry. Colorado hates Nebraska more than Nebraska hates Colorado. Historically, the Huskers have been a much better program than the Buffaloes, although last year Colorado thumped Nebraska in Boulder. We expect this game to be very close. We think Colorado is actually slightly better on paper. They do have more talent, but we also think Matt Rhule is a good coach, who a lot of people are sleeping on going into 2024. So we think Nebraska is going to just barely beat the Buffaloes in Lincoln in one of the better games of this season. As far as Purdue and Rutgers go, these two teams always give Nebraska a hard time. But we think Purdue isn't as good as they've been recently with Jeff Brom now the coach at Louisville. And Rutgers is one of those teams that, they just ground and pound against you. And Nebraska, I think they're prepared for that this year, especially with their quarterback on offense who can offset, whatever the defense gives up. And we think the defense is going to do just fine. So we got to give Nebraska the slight advantage in that one. As far as UCLA goes, tough to get a read on them in the preseason. We do think they're going to struggle in Big Ten play this year. But it is UCLA. They do have some talent. And with Nebraska, as confident as we are about them this year, we think that, jury's still out. We haven't seen them play a game yet, so that's why UCLA is in the toss-ups. But yeah, we do have to give the Huskers the advantage in that one. As far as Iowa goes, this is going to upset a lot of Iowa fans. We think that Nebraska is going to go into Kinnick and pull the upset. Nebraska's defense has been good, and they were good last year. It's just Nebraska, for whatever reason, cannot close games, and that's something that they're going to have to do against Iowa, especially at Kinnick, for them to have a chance. But we think they're going to do it. We think Raiola's a real deal. We think that the defense is going to be more than good enough to put together a good season for Nebraska, so we got to give the Huskers the slight advantage in this one, even though they are on the road. As far as likely losses go, we have USC and Wisconsin. USC is always terrific on offense. They are losing quarterback Caleb Williams to the NFL. The defense is perennially, under Lincoln Riley, one of the worst in the Power 5, now Power 4. But we think the defense will be improved this year. They did hire UCLA's defensive coordinator to take over the same position at USC. USC has better athletes than UCLA does, so he has more to work with from a resources perspective. So we do think USC's defense will be improved. The offense will take a step back, but it's always good under Riley. We think Miller Moss will be a very good quarterback for the Trojans. So we got to give USC the advantage. We don't think Nebraska's defense is quite good enough to, hold USC's offense in check all day, especially in a game that's going to be played at the Coliseum. We think as far as Wisconsin goes, the game may be in Lincoln, but we think the Badgers win it because they're essentially Nebraska, but better as far as their play style goes. They play good defense. The offense, they like to, go tempo. And I know Nebraska's more old school now under Matt Rhule, but Wisconsin's historically that way. I know now they like to throw it more under Luke Fickell, but they still have a good line. They still have some decent running backs. So we think that the Badgers are going to have, not an easy time because the game's in Lincoln, but they won't be challenged too much, especially as talented as Raiola is. We think that true freshman playing against the Wisconsin defense, we think the Badgers are going to mix things up and confuse them a little bit. So we think the Badgers actually go into Lincoln and win it. Looking at the guaranteed loss for Nebraska, it's Ohio State. We think Ohio State's the most talented team in college football. Tier 1 of the Big Ten, in our view, is Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. Nebraska's not quite there yet. Maybe they'll get there within a few years. Matt Rhule's been successful everywhere he's coached. He's coached at Temple. He made them good. He's coached at Baylor. He made them good. Now he's coaching at Nebraska. He has yet to make them good, but if history is any indicator, we think that, with time, Nebraska will be back in the upper echelon of the Big Ten. But for now, they're not, and the game against Ohio State is going to be a tough one for Husker fans to watch if our, estimation of the game is correct.
Looking at the schedule recap, we do have Nebraska starting off the season 7-0. We have them as slight underdogs to Colorado, but getting the win. And going into that Ohio State game undefeated. However, we have the Buckeyes winning that one pretty handily. Ohio State is just a much, much more talented team than Nebraska. But the Huskers bounced back the following week with a home victory over UCLA, moving them to 8-1 on the season. Following bye week number 2, though, they dropped 2 out of those final 3 games to USC and Wisconsin, bouncing back in the last week of the season with a win over Iowa. So their predicted record sits at 9-3. However, adding up all the percentages, the projected record is more like 6.55 and 5.45. So maybe we're giving Nebraska a few too many wins. As we know, the past few years, they've had a tendency to lose those close games. So it's very possible they finish around 6-6 yet again. I could see them losing to Colorado or Rutgers or the road trip to Iowa, even at Purdue. So there's a lot of losable games on the schedule. But there's also a chance they could beat USC, they could beat Wisconsin, maybe they drop one of the other few games. But 9-3 does seem like a very realistic scenario for this Huskers team. FPI has them sitting at 6.5 and 5.5, so pretty much right on the same projected record as us, with only a 4.9% chance to make the playoffs and a 0.1% chance to win the national championship. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in our next video.